Good afternoon, guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to another exciting episode of Blether Together, your weekly breakdown of news and politics and around the world, coming to you live from the National's offices in Glasgow. My name is Stephen Paton, and I'm here on behalf of the National. And joining me today is Ewan Gurr from the Trussell Trust.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming in. Now, you might notice immediately two things. First of all, that there's only two of us, and secondly, that Ewan is wearing dark glasses inside. And we're going to explain both of those things very quickly. So, first of all, Angela Haggerty, who's normally my co-host, is on holiday in Poland right now, and I didn't find that out until about 45 minutes ago. So I was caught out without a co-host, so it's just the two of us today. And for Ewan, do you want to quickly explain the dark glasses?
Yeah, this came up actually a few weeks ago when I was last on the show, and it is actually to do with the fact that my youngest daughter stood on my other pair of glasses, so that's why I'm wearing these prescription lenses. But just to clarify, for those who did message me asking if I was blind, I am not. And also, if I'd taken drugs, I also did not. It's just purely an issue of it's the only pair I've got. So just to clear that up early on.
Yeah, it's just like our disclaimer at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously, this is the National's breakdown of news and politics, and today we're going to be discussing a range of issues. But since Ewan is from the Trussell Trust, we will be focusing in a little bit on issues around poverty and homelessness in Scotland and some recent statistics that actually came out today. But while we're doing that, as always, we do want to hear what you have to say as well, so please do leave your comments down below. We are watching them all as they come in. So yeah, we'll give a shout out to whoever wants to say hello first. You know what, I'm not actually going to watch that, we're just going to get on with the shoo. But if anyone does want to say hello, we will say hi back to whoever's there first. So yeah, I guess kicking it off then, today there was a new report published from the Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh, which was looking specifically at homelessness in Scotland, and saying that by 2041, homelessness in Scotland will have risen by 53%. That's the kind of estimate. And that's not necessarily just like on the street homelessness, it also includes people who have no fixed residence, couch surfing, staying in hotels or hostels when they can, quite a broad one. Yeah, and this is quite a big statistic because, like, specifically recently as well in Glasgow, there's actually been kind of more of the council started to recognise that homelessness within Glasgow itself has started to grow quite drastically to the point where it's very visible on the streets. I mean, so you obviously work in this kind of area. What do you think is starting to really contribute to this growth in homelessness in Scotland?
Well, I think we've had a perfect storm of issues that have emerged really over the last 15 years. I mean, a couple of years ago there was the Feeding Britain report, which came out, done by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on hunger in the United Kingdom. And what that indicated is between the decade from 2003 to 2013, there had been an exponential rise in a variety of different costs of living, which was related to food, fuel, and housing. Those three things were the highest three. So food prices had risen by over 30%, fuel prices had risen by over 150%, and housing prices had risen by over 40%, which was contrasted by the fact that people had only seen a 28% increase in their income. So I think that the cost of living has been a crisis that has affected people right across the spectrum. But I think over the past couple of years, what's a real concern for people that we work with, and the Trussell Trust is responsible for the network of food banks in Scotland and across the United Kingdom, what we've seen is that low income has become the driving factor over the last year for people coming to food banks. Coupled that with the fact that the Welfare Reform Act was implemented in April 2013. That was obviously the main aspect of the Welfare Reform Act that many remember is what was crudely known as the bedroom tax, or otherwise known as the spare room subsidy. What that did was essentially ascribed a 14% deduction in housing benefit to people who had a spare bedroom, and a 25% deduction in housing benefit to those who had 2 or more spare bedrooms. What we saw was an exponential rise in the demand for emergency food relief as a direct consequence of that. And what that's done is, underneath all of that, it's all the people that no longer sign on for job seekers allowance now. It's those that no longer see their job centre as the first port of call. In Glasgow, for instance, we've seen a 42% decrease in the claimant count over the last 10 years. Now, people could say that's good, maybe people are in work, but we know that employment is increasingly insecure. The other concern is, have those people just slipped off the grid? And if they have slipped off the grid, are they now homeless? I think in Dundee, the city that I live in, there's a prevalence of homelessness, but it's often covered over by the fact that we have 12 different housing units. So those people are in homeless units, so they would be considered and registered as homeless, but they wouldn't necessarily be considered as roofless, which is what we're seeing on our streets more often. But I think, Stephen, to sort of bring all that to a conclusion, I think it's absolutely a prime concern that charities are telling us that the numbers are going to go up. The fact is, these are the people that are working on the front line. And I think what Heriot Watt have done today is they've ratified what a lot of other organisations like Shelter and others are saying, which is that homelessness is on the rise. It's not decreasing, and it's becoming more visible.
And actually, we've got a question that's come in from one of our columnists, which is Vonnie Moyes, who, on the topic of homelessness, is bringing up some of the issues with the sharing economy are specifically to do with like Airbnb, where people are buying a property and then driving prices up because it becomes more scarce as a result, but they're buying it just to let it out. They're giving the example that house prices for a 2-bed flat near them is now over £250,000, which is, of course, pricing a lot of people out of, either being able to buy homes or, for that matter, even rent homes if they're no longer available. Do you think that's contributing as well to this homelessness issue?
First of all, thank you for that question, Vonnie. Big fan, and if you ever do want to come out to one of our food banks in your fair city of Edinburgh, which is my old hometown, you are more than welcome. I know that my press officer was in touch with you a couple of years ago, so please do get in touch.
Yes, this is it. This show's just bringing people together, like
yeah,
new opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think, I mean, what's concerning is that, when I got married 8 years ago, it was £350 to rent a private, household, 1-bedroomed. Now, 8 years on, you would not be able to find a 1-bedroomed private let in Dundee anywhere for love nor money. And I think the truth is that people are buying these properties and they kind of feel coerced to go with the market rate. You could undercut everybody else and you would get a tenant in there. But the truth of the matter is that there's so many people who are ultimately looking for properties, and it's what the bedroom tax ultimately tried to eliminate was sort of encouraging people to move from houses where there was several spare bedrooms into houses where there was less bedrooms, so that it could free up some of that housing stock. I think what a lot of the charities in the third sector were concerned about was almost like the arm up the back tactics. We're going to decrease your real income and move you into another property. I don't think there was more of a mutual exchange type approach. But I think Vonnie's pointed out something that is very much a concern, is there's a lot more people that own not only their own property, but two properties. And meanwhile, there's loads of people like my wife and I who've only just got onto the housing market, but there's so many people we work with and colleagues that just can't. So I think there is this real juxtaposition that we have situations that make it really difficult for people to ever own, let alone be able to live in a home as this report has indicated.
And of course, one of the other problems with the bedroom tax as well was the kind of lack of understanding of individual people's situations, whether or not the house
Absolutely.
had been fitted for them to access, like specifically due to their own needs and everything else. So hence, obviously,
Stephen,
being
on
a bit of
that,
a problem.
I mean, you've hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I know of a guy just 15 miles from here who literally attempted to take his life twice within the period of 18 months because of a 14% deduction to his housing benefit. There was extreme mental ill health there, 4 children and a wife. I mean, we're not talking about people who have had a chaotic lifestyle or are living in a perpetual state of crisis. This is just genuine, hard-working people who've lived a sustainable life, who, fortunately, the guy now owns his own home, he was living in a council house. But 2 years ago, his situation was very, very different. Now, had it not been for those failed attempts, that guy would no longer be with us. And I think it's understanding the mental health that sometimes is exacerbated by a social security system that sometimes doesn't support people in the best way that it could.
And just so you know, Vonnie has come back and said that they would love to come along. So there you go. That's something that can now happen.
Excellent.
But yeah, health is another factor here, I think, as well. Like looking not only housing, but just like in general, people who are not making as much or making below the kind of like average income, they are being affected by rising house prices. They are finding themselves in situations where they're having to come to food banks because of the cost of living rising much faster than wages are. And it ties into actually another report that came out today as well from Cancer Research UK, looking at the sheer amount of sugar that Scots get by on a regular basis. So like every day, apparently, Scotland purchases 110 tonnes of sugar a day. And of course, sugar goes into all these kind of processed foods, the kind of cheaper foods, the foods that people on a low income just do not have an option other than to purchase. I mean, we are literally in this situation where people on low income are unable to find housing and are unable to find food that is actually, you know, able to sustain them in a healthy or nutritious manner. It's kind of multiple factors all leading to poorer folk in our society find themselves at this kind of absolute impasse of being unhealthy and unable to find a home.
Well, I mean, not to divert the conversation too much, Stephen, because you and I, of course, are vegans, so we have a vested interest in the subject of food. But yeah, I mean, I have 3 kids. And I'm sure Vonnie knows this, given that she's a mum as well, as you're constantly trying to encourage your kids to eat good food. And fortunately, my kids do. I mean, unless they go to Granny's house, in which case they get saturated with sugar. But I mean, one of the things that we as a network of food banks sought to do in this last year is to actually remove 500 kilogram bags of sugar from our, ultimately that conflicted with the nutritional balance that we seek to get. Because obviously our food is nutritionally balanced for a minimum of 3 working days. But having that 500 gram of bag of sugar, which is the only real option that you have, was conflicting with that. We actually took a stance to go against that because it is also a dignity issue. I think if you've received, coffee or tea with a food parcel, you ultimately sometimes are just looking for that sugar to be able to make it taste like a normal cup of tea. So I think that there is a challenge that we experience there in the voluntary sector, but I think on a larger scale, the over-reliance on unhealthy foods is absolutely toxic, and sugar ultimately plays into that wider debate. But I think, going back to the days of where, my wife, for instance, who I know is growing food in our back garden at the moment, which ended up in my sandwiches today and will end up in my dinner this evening probably. I think we need to find some of those original, sort of grassroots skills that we used to have. We really miss that stuff.
I think they always dig for victory.
Yeah, I mean, again, we have a vested interest there, but I think finding some of those original skills that people used to use. My granny used to grow her own veg. It's such a valuable thing. And we're fortunate in Dundee. There's a city full of allotments. But you don't see so many in Glasgow, and I'd love to see more of that throughout the country, encouraging just urban growing again. How good would that be? So I think it's rekindling some of those original skills. Unfortunately, I might have 3 kids under the age of 5, but my goodness, do they go for their greens before they go for anything else? I mean, we need to rediscover some of those skills and encourage our kids back to that kind of health.
Absolutely, but like you say, it's down to a lack of space to grow, it's down to lack of access to even tools to do so, it's down to lack of access to good food. Like, I mean, there's a lot of issues here that kind of like make healthy living like an active kind of block to achieving that for a lot of people that I think we really need to tackle as well. But just as a society, not only education, but access, ultimately. There's some really cool projects I know about in some other cities, I think. Leeds has a really cool tool sharing project. So it's a community tool share, anyone can go borrow a tool, then take it back again, and kind of tying back into being able to garden as well without having to invest in all of the equipment. Definitely some more community initiatives, these kind of things of making it so you don't need to own all the property in order to actually look after your own patch if you want to grow. But more than that, just making things accessible to people.
Yeah, and even just couple of minutes walk from here, you've got Woodlands Community Garden, which is a fantastic initiative that again is about growing and sharing food, and I think finding those community models are absolutely vital.
So we've got someone also recommending a book in the comments at the moment, Donald Hodgson saying The Great Food Bank Siege by Mark Franklin is an excellent book.
Oh yeah, Mark Franklin, yeah, Mark's a good guy. I mean, Mark's running a fantastic project by, I mean, he's running a project called First Base Agency down in Dumfries. Yeah, I mean, Mark got in the neck a couple of years ago for having been a yes voter. So I'm sure there's many people in this building and also out there that probably felt a bit insulted by that. Yeah, the Great Food Bank Siege actually was a caricature written. I mean, Mark Franklin, as well as running a fantastic food bank, is also an excellent author. Anytime I've met him, I've never went away with any less than about 3 or 4 of his books. But the Great Food Bank essentially about, it's a caricature of the story of David Mundell coming to open a food bank in Dumfries, and what he did was he fictionalised it, but ultimately it was about that. So yeah, I was probably, I've not read the book, but I'm probably in there at some point in some other form.
Wasn't you that invited Mundell in the first
place? It was. I'm going to get slammed. Let me make it absolutely clear though. I mean, David Mundell was the least of my worries. I also invited David Coburn, who is the UKIP MEP to the food bank that I used to run in Dundee. So I get slammed for it, and any time I put up a picture on Twitter, I will lose followers. But the truth is, I invite absolutely everyone and their granny to a food bank. One of the things that my boss used to always say is, come and see, and that was the words of Mother Teresa. And while David Mundell did that, and I know he was very nervous that day, what we did is we spoke to David, about some of the challenges that people face as a direct consequence of things like the Welfare Reform Act in 2012. I told him about, for instance, Suzanne, who had to give up breastfeeding after 6 weeks due to malnutrition, lost 2 stone in weight over the period of 2 years because she was forgoing meals to ensure that her children could eat. So what we did was we took that opportunity not only to invite David Mundell to see what the food bank was doing, but also to hear some of the real raw stories of people who are sometimes directly impacted by policy that can be created with goodwill sometimes, but actually can have a deleterious effect on people's lives. So I think, for me, it's not a partisan issue. If you're elected, I will invite you to a food bank. I just will, and that'll upset people. But I think it's the right thing to do because, whether I can influence the trajectory of policy or not, what I do know is David Mundell sits next to Theresa May at the most powerful decision-making table in Britain. And for me, I feel that we have to do whatever we can by whatever possible means to try and inspire and influence the conversation and change the trajectory of the conversation. So yeah.
Did he seem changed at the end of it?
I mean, I'll never know the long-term impact of that. I've met David on a number of occasions, and David presents himself one way publicly and one way privately, and publicly he very much toes the party line. But in private meetings I've had with him, there is a lot more flexibility there. I mean, people would say, and I wrote an article for the Sunday Herald at the time explaining why I invited David Mundell to come along. But I think for me, it boils down to the issue of trying to steer the conversation and influence the conversation. And I cannot go to my bed at night knowing that children are going to bed hungry if I'm not able to get those stories and amplify those voices to the people that most need to hear them. So I don't know long term what the implications of that will be. What I have noticed is that there have been other conversations that have opened up within the Conservative Party with colleagues down south and also in Scotland as a direct consequence of that. But I think that we in the voluntary sector need not to be seen as the enemy, but the informant, essentially saying, this is what's going on as a direct consequence of the rising cost of living, as a direct consequence of policy. Can we find a better way to do things? And I think we can. But on Mark Franklin, that guy is such a lovely, lovely guy. And if anybody gets a chance to go and see First Base Agency in Dumfries, they are a brilliant project. So Mark, if you're ever watching, or if anybody who's a fan of Mark is watching, he's always welcomed me with open arms and with a great deal of hospitality. So I've got nothing but respect for the man.
See, I actually remember way back during the referendum itself, there was this piece that was written. I can't remember his name now. I think he's a teacher. He was sort of well known in sort of the political Twitter scene for a little while. But he wrote a thing saying how when people were criticising the rise in the use of food banks and how Scotland becoming an independent country and going its own way could potentially tackle that because of policy from the UK government, he said that we should be happy about food banks because they were the sign of Scotland becoming a modern European country. I assume the whole kind of all looking after one another. It's sort of missing the point that in an ideal world we wouldn't need them at all.
Yeah, I think I mean there is two sides to the whole food bank phenomenon. The one aspect is that absolutely you celebrate the way in which communities pulled together in lead times to respond to a need. You know, that is a symbol of community. It's a symbol of society. I was talking with a colleague at the Courier newspaper in Dundee this morning about that, and I think that is something that is inspiring and something that needs to be celebrated and amplified. What I would say is there is a flip side to that debate, which is about food poverty, and that is not something that we celebrate. While you celebrate the way people tackle an issue, that is good, but you never celebrate the cause and effect. So I think it's amplifying the positive, and ultimately understanding that those who run food banks are often the enemy of food poverty, but food poverty is never something that you celebrate. And ultimately, you know, I know there was a piece done by Colette Douglas-Home a few years ago where she said that Ewan was the one man in Scotland whose ambition is to be unemployed, and it's absolutely true. I would rather be lining up at the job centre than doing the job that I do, but as long as there's someone going to bed hungry, I'll be here doing my bit to try and offer that support.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it did read a little bit as almost like UK apologists. So I was like, you should be grateful that we now have food banks because it's a sign of a modern country. It's like, it was a bizarre argument.
It is a bizarre argument, and it's sad. I would love there to be a day where the need for food banks is eliminated. I mean, our strapline as an organisation is Stop UK Hunger. Now that might sound ambitious, but the fact is, I mean, I'm thinking of last year. I had 3 conversations with 3 cabinet ministers within the Scottish Government. One of those was with Jean Freeman, Social Security, and we were talking about a food bank where there was a Scottish Welfare Fund advisor placed in there. They had a 97% success rate of accessing crisis grants for people that needed them, and a 31% decrease in food bank use. Do you know what? If the Scottish Government was to work with us and others to develop a clear and coherent strategy on food poverty in Scotland, we could drive the numbers through the floor overnight. But it really needs that strategy.
Yeah. So, you know, the point I was bringing up there about the apologists is because Vonnie's actually asked another question here that reminded me of that specific moment of the sort of almost upholding us, taking our place. But they're saying that they're asking if you think that food bank has actually become a bit of a dirty word and how it's thrown around in politics at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you want I mean, Vonnie, you should have been on here. You know, if only we'd discovered before today that
I mean,
Angela wasn't.
If you'd like to come on sometime, Vonnie, just let me know because I'm always looking for more guests.
There's your invitation.
So no, just getting invited left, right, and centre on this show.
Well, you know, she's a national columnist, so yeah. But I think yes, Vonnie. I think to an extent, see, the issue of poverty needs to become politicised, but it does not need to become party politicised, if you understand what I mean. You've got to politicise issues of poverty and various other issues, because they are macroeconomic issues that need to be discussed in a political context, because there's always ways that policy directly impacts on those who are experiencing difficulty. But I think, coming back to your question, I think it has become very partisan. And I think that's there's various sort of parties that will throw an insult across the chamber, and then there's another party that will throw it back across the chamber. And I think my concern is that food bank is seen as a catch-all term for people who are just experiencing difficulty, and then using that as a party political weapon. I think what we need to do is to get underneath those issues and talk about what we talked about earlier, which was the rising cost of living, issues of homelessness, all the sort of factors that underpin that. If you're not going to get down to the nitty-gritty details, that actually food bank is up here, but actually it's all this stuff under here we really need to tackle. And I think if we're not talking about that within the political context and looking to prioritise the voices of people in poverty and policy for people experiencing poverty, then what are we doing? I mean, what's our politics all about if it's not about people who are experiencing need and us being a just society that takes care of those who are struggling? I know what it was to struggle 12 years ago now, and I think every one of us at some point has had some form of difficulty. So yeah, we need that support. We need that infrastructure that takes care of us at our lowest ebb.
But I think it's interesting the point you're making about how we've got to get past seeing food banks as just a place for food when people are struggling, and actually starting to see some of the broader implications of why we're at that place, but also to see that food isn't the only area where people are near things like period poverty in Scotland as well, which actually there have been some interesting things happening recently in terms of that kind of like a prototype in Aberdeen, yeah. I've started to see that. Oh, this is not a luxury item. It's not a luxury. It's such a wild idea to think that something that is so necessary could be constituted that way. Like there are ways to tackle in other ways, other projects that can start to bring in to sort of chip away at these insecurities that people have, not just in food but in other areas. Which also, because you're not spending money in that, obviously you've got more available for other areas such as food. It's a multi-pronged approach. There's no one solution that fixes everything. It's that sort of catch-all thing of the magic pill that will somehow solve all your problems that's constantly put out. It's a broad approach we need to take to kind of dealing with all the roots and causes of poverty around Scotland.
Well, I would describe food banks as both the tourniquet and the triage. I mean, in one sense, the tourniquet is to stem the bleed, but ultimately you've got to go to the source and find out why the bleed exists in the first place. And ultimately, the food bank is often that triage point where you not only deal with the short-term issue, which is the need for food, but the long-term issue that's actually the reason for the need for food. Is it a benefit delay? Is it a benefit change? Is it low income? Is it debt? Is it domestic violence? Is it a delayed wage? To use a story to illustrate that, I mean, the period poverty debate has been something that my organisation has obviously played a role in, and last year Monica Lennon, the MSP for Scottish Labour, who focuses on inequalities, raised a debate in the Scottish Parliament about that. And as soon as I found out that she was going to do that, I picked up the phone 15 minutes before Monica was about to go into the chamber, and I says, Monica, I says, how many minutes have you got on your opening speech? And she says, I've got about 7. I says, right, carve out a minute and share this story right at the start. And what I did was I told her about a story 7 years ago when a young girl came into the food bank in Dundee, and we used to get multiple different items like shampoo, soap and other things, and I took her through to the room. I says, we've got a few other items as well, and I would never say, do you need, because ultimately that just brings up the whole feeling of stigma and shame. But what we would say is, would you like, we've got some of this excellent stuff. And one of the things that she did just at that moment is she immediately pointed at the sanitary items and says, I won't be needing any of those because I haven't had a period for several months. Now, at that moment, I didn't know what to say. She'd literally just come from her GP, and because she was undernourished, she wasn't getting enough calories, her period had just stopped. Now, 2 weeks later, that girl came back into the food bank, and we were in this busy office. There's a lot of people buzzing about with giving her food for the second time, and she just squeezed my arm and said, Ewan, just letting you know, things are back to normal. And only she and I knew what that meant. Basically, she said, because she'd received the food from the food bank, biology had kicked back in. And I think when we're in a situation where, women and girls are so undernourished that they're not getting their period, that is bad crack. But I think what the period poverty debate has done is it's also highlighted just how broad this issue is. We gave some evidence about the fact that we knew of women who were supplementing the use of sanitary items with socks, with newspaper, with toilet roll. I mean, come on. This is an essential item for, if not half of our population, more than half of our population. It's not a luxury item, it's something that every one of us needs in the same way that we need food. And Monica made a very provocative statement. She and I did an interview for BBC a couple of weeks ago. She made a very provocative statement, but it was an interesting one. And I'll throw it out there because it's a bit of a political grenade, but she says if men had periods, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I think, wow, there's maybe something to that whole debate.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I would argue that's probably very accurate. I mean, it's the same reason that we've, often seen things like the NHS will give out condoms for free.
Yeah.
But not sanitary towels.
Stephen, I was at a round table that Monica ran a few months ago at the Scottish Parliament, and there was a friend that was sitting over the other side who said, she was part of the Scottish Youth Parliament, and basically said, I can get condoms at college, but she says the truth is, I can get condoms for something that I can abstain from, but I can't abstain from having my period. And I think there's such common sense in that. But what I would say, just going back to the party, becoming party political about this whole issue, you cannot become party political with politics. With poverty, I should say. And I think what is good about this is it's not just been Scottish Labour that has been at the vanguard of this. It's also been people like Gillian Martin. Gillian has done an absolutely fantastic job of raising the profile of this issue. And so it's good to see. I mean, we did an event at the Scottish Parliament a number of months ago. The Trussell Trust was doing an event that day, and it was great to see both Gillian and Monica attend that. And I think what started that night was a conversation on the issue of period poverty and finding ways in which they can work with the voluntary sector to do this. So on this issue, we have literally just this week completed a piece of research on the scale of period poverty across the country and what we see in our food banks, and what's been absolutely incredible. Usually when you put out a survey, you get 20% response. Exactly 100% response from our food banks, and that research will be made public in a few weeks' time, and we'll obviously be feeding that back to Aileen Campbell, the Health Minister, and also Angela Constance, the Minister for Social Security. So I think this is a big issue, and it's something that we really need to get onto the political radar.
So you can give us any idea of what started to come out for it, or is it still early days?
I can tell you this, and this will be public record on Monday, because Monica Lennon is launching her bill on period poverty this Monday. What we know is that there is only one Trussell Trust food bank in Scotland that does not provide sanitary items to women and girls, and it's literally just because it's a very rural, remote location. It's not an issue they see a great deal of, but I think what is interesting is that of the 118 locations in Scotland, 117 of them provide sanitary items to women and girls. And in one sense, again, it's this food poverty issue. We don't celebrate that, but I think what we do celebrate is the way that communities are pulling together in lean times to respond to that need. So I think there is some cause for celebration, as well as it's a bit of a triumph and a tragedy at the same time there. But I think that's really, I think that highlights two things. As much as I would say that's a good thing, I think what it says to our leaders is they really need to do something about this issue. When it becomes the responsibility of voluntary organisations to provide something that I consider to be a statutory necessity, the state needs to get involved and fighting for that issue as well. I mean, at the end of the day, this is about dignity, and if you take away your dignity, people have nothing left.
And what can the state be doing? What sort of steps should we actually be realistically looking at here?
Well,
I mean, obviously we've got this, like we said, pilot in Aberdeen to do with period poverty, and that has had, from my understanding, a great success. And I assume the next step for that would obviously be rolling it out everywhere else, so we can see that success replicated everywhere else. But in other areas, like what we were talking about earlier on, of the wild amount of sugar that Scotland consumes on a daily basis, which I think has got us at the most obese in Europe, or in that kind of position, like we're as a country, we've got a very difficult relationship with food. What kind of steps do you think we can actually be taking to really start to address that? Yeah,
well, I think coming back to the issue of sanitary items, I think I think if there was someone else I would congratulate at this point, it would be Dave Simmers, who is the project manager of the CFINE project that is piloting this initiative. So CFINE is basically shorthand for community food initiatives in the North East. They do an absolute power of work in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, and in the past I've heard of even beyond those two local authorities. But what I would say is that Dave has been a really strong spokesman for trying not to categorise issues as food poverty, period poverty. He says at the end of the day it's poverty, and it's it comes down to the fact that people don't have enough money in their pockets. That's essentially it. And so I think there is a point to be made there. I think sometimes we use these terms as shorthand to try and say, but, and so you're trying to divide up the debate. But I think there is a point to be made there. But in coming to your question there, Stephen, I think what we need to do is to have a strong, open, transparent debate about whether or not sanitary items should be made universally available, free of charge for women and girls. And I think that's where Monica would probably say, yes, we should. and also would say if men, had experienced poverty, we probably wouldn't be having this debate. And I think there is something to be said about that. So I think that we, as a charity, we would support the universal provision of sanitary items for women and girls. I think when you've got girls at school, young women at school who ultimately don't have access to these items, I think that is a concern. When we've heard a few stories of domestic violence where violent husbands or partners have withheld some of these essential items to women who are in situations of abuse. I mean, this is completely ridiculous. We need to find a way to break down that barrier, and here you go, this is universally available. I've heard the other argument that, what about, female CEOs that are on 80 grand a year? I don't care. My primary concern is ultimately about women and girls who are on a restricted or limited income, and that ultimately transcends just those who are on benefits. We're actually talking about girls as well who are 11, 12, 13 and at school. This stuff needs to be on the political agenda more now than ever. And I think it's a really opportune moment for the Scottish Government to say, we are progressive, we are concerned about justice, we are concerned about dignity. So let's broaden out this issue and let's look at ways in which we can support our women and girls. I would support that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point you're making as well about abusive partners, I mean, ultimately what this is people often find themselves in precarious situations because they do not have either stable income, stable access to resources. Like, it's the same way I think we've had so much discussion recently about universal basic income being another universal idea, which gives everyone a strong place to work from so that other areas become more secure as a result. Like, it is easier to leave an abusive partner. It is easier to take a step out of like a bad job that you're in to find somewhere else where you might have problems because it's a 0 hours contract or whatever else, and you need to find something else. Like, when we provide a stable foundation, it gives people the opportunity to really flourish and get out of like bad situations that they're in, that when we haven't got that in place, they can't.
I mean, it's interesting because you mentioned universal basic income. I know that there's various parties have in the past proposed that as a suitable mechanism. And Councillor Matt Kerr, who's a Labour councillor in Glasgow, has been a real champion over the last year for universal basic income. I remember there was a fantastic article in the Observer done by Kevin McKenna with Matt where he discussed this. And I think, when you get into universal basic income, you begin to think about potential for increased taxation, and you then open up the whole debate about the Scandinavian countries. And the truth is, I remember going for a meal with my colleagues in Glasgow a while back, and it was a Norwegian waitress that was speaking to us, and I was so intrigued. I says, that's an interesting accent you've got, and obviously I found out she was Norwegian, and I was just talking to her about it. I says, I've never been to Norway, but I've heard a lot about the social infrastructure, and she said, bottom line, she says, I would be earning a lot more than I'm earning here if I was in Norway. She said, she says people talk about £8 for a pint of beer and stuff like that, but she says when you realise what people actually get paid per hour, you don't bother. You're not concerned about paying £8 for a beer. I'm doing a master's in business administration at the moment, and one of my lecturers, she lived in Copenhagen for 10 years. She said, Ewan, 40% of my income came out of my wage, but she said when you saw what I got back for that, free healthcare, free schools, free swimming pool, she says, free gym membership, she said everything was provided, and the fact is people were taken good care of, especially our poorest citizens. She said there was next to no poverty when I lived in Denmark. And so I think there really is something to be said for not just looking at universal basic income in isolation, but actually broadening out the issue to say, Stephen, would you be willing to be taxed a little bit more on your monthly wage? I certainly would.
Yeah, same. But exactly, and what I find really fascinating about universal basic income is where it's found support, because it's actually found support from both the left and the right. Because the left are looking at it going, this is great, this gives everyone an opportunity to kind of have this like solid amount of money, they can go off and do this, they can do that, and the right are looking at it going, oh, well, if we don't need to do means testing, we could be saving all this money over here. So everyone kind of wins.
And the truth is, you know, there's been, on a UK-wide basis, there's been a corporation tax cut for many businesses. So I think on the right, I can also see the other argument that would be, well, actually, if we've given our businesses a corporation tax cut, why couldn't they raise their income a little bit? I mean, one thing I would support, and this is my view, not necessarily the view of the Trussell Trust, in case of what you described last time as any impending lawsuits. But one thing I would say is that, you know, the Scottish Government has been criticised previously for offering corporation tax cuts. Well, let's think about a more progressive approach. I mean, what if every organisation that was offered a corporation tax cut was also encouraged to implement the living wage for their employers? I think that would be a way of turning what is seen to be a regressive policy into a very progressive policy. Let's make our economy attractive not only to business, but also attractive to employees as well. I think if it's attractive for employers and employees, then you've got a win-win situation there. So yeah, I mean, let's raise people's incomes. Let's find a way in which we can get our economy moving again. We've got Brexit on the horizon, and we've got, you know, the decreasing value of the pound. So you know, we've already got the proposed increasing cost of living. So there is a possibility that our economy could be in some difficulty. I think we've got to find a way in which we can encourage people to be more mobile.
Specifically as well, because of the fact that wages are so low, quite often the only means that people can actually live on those low wages is because they are ultimately also being subsidised by the state. Yeah. So in a way, large corporations can only maintain their workforce because everyone else is paying for their employees to work for them, which is a problem that we need to address as well. But we are starting to come to the end of the show, so we're going to have to wrap this.
Wow.
We've got another couple of minutes, so just to kind of finish, I did want to also share one of my favourite stories of the week, which is that after the success of Glastonbury, or rather specifically after Jeremy Corbyn's success at Glastonbury, where he got a lot of love, and apparently, interestingly, you know, the chant that was going around, the "Oh Jeremy Corbyn," "Oh Jeremy Corbyn," whatever, sales of Seven Nation Army like skyrocketed after that, because you know the White Stripes song that.
Oh right! Oh yeah.
Yeah, apparently back up in the charts again because of Corbyn. Anyway. After that, there was one Tory MP who was kind of like, well, if Corbyn's getting all this, why aren't we trying to get in some of this? And they're going to have to set up their own Tory Glastonbury. Yeah. Their own version of Tory Glastonbury. Except there's a couple of small differences between Glastonbury and the Tory Glastonbury. So obviously Glastonbury, that's its thing. Small differences, there's only going to be 150 people at their one. It's by invite only. It's in a secret rural location that you don't find out until beforehand in case people show up. You know, now I'm listing it, it doesn't sound anything like Glastonbury. Yeah. And I think,
well,
who knows?
Do you know what my suggestion would be? I mean, we've talked about inviting David Mundell to a food bank. Why don't we issue an invite to David Mundell to go to Glastonbury? Yeah. Or even Theresa May? Could you imagine it?
I'd love to see Theresa May take the stage at Glastonbury.
Yeah, I mean...
right after Corbyn, see how...
Well, yeah, I mean, I think Jeremy Corbyn, to his credit, he has sparked a renaissance of political engagement. I mean, you know, the fact that they are experiencing numbers akin to when Tony Blair was leading the party in terms of party membership, and I know there is this whole debate about the £3 thing, and I get that. But I mean, even if you just take it on his record alone in terms of how they did it the last general election, I mean, I went to see Jeremy Corbyn when he came to Dundee, and I was in Overflow Room 3. This was the first campaign, and you know, he is a very engaging character. What the two most attractive leadership credentials for me or characteristics would be integrity and humility, and I think he has both of them in bucket loads, and I think that's why people are inspired by him. Is that, yeah, he sometimes has struggled at PMQs, he's sometimes fumbled some answers, and I know that some of his, you know, there's been, you know, difficulties in the cabinet, his shadow cabinet, but he's a man of integrity, and I think that principle shines through. And I just love the way he just turns up at these big rallies, and he turns up at you know, he's standing with a woman who's got her top off. You know, it's just like, you know, only Jeremy Corbyn would get away with something like that. But yeah, let's encourage the Conservatives to get involved. I'm apolitical. I mean, you know, who next? David Coburn for Glastonbury. I mean, you know, let's invite them all. You know, I'll invite them all to food banks, so let's invite them all to Glastonbury. What do you think, Stephen?
I don't know if anybody wants that. I'm not sure. anyone's
Sturgeon
ready
for
it.
Glastonbury. What about that? Let's get Sturgeon involved. A tea in the park,
yeah.
you know. I've never
Just
seen
get out,
Sturgeon
yeah,
at tea in the park, you know.
Not yet. No, it's true. I think Corbyn might have like kind of peaked that one, but it's true. Like in terms of like the kind of renewal, I'd argue a lot of that is kind of probably further in England because in Scotland we've kind of had this other big thing going on with where we kind of. I think there's a lot of crossover between the independence movement and the Corbyn movement, in that both were popular movements that asked people to question what they wanted the future of this country to be.
Yeah.
Independence did it first, and then Corbyn kind of like bringing back ideas people hadn't been talking about for a little while, or they've been considered radical and wild, and people going, oh, actually, hang on, that sounds pretty good. Like in both instances, very much people sort of re-examining, I guess, the land around them and what they wanted it to be. So but that does bring us to you want to
yeah. Just one favour. I mean,
Yeah.
I think the crossover is as they were talking about. You know, let's look at the issue of Trident. Let's look at the issue of what social security looks like for people in poverty. So I think you're right. There is a bit of a crossover there, and how that dilemma plays out over the next couple of years will be very interesting.
I think so. But that does bring us to the end of this week's show. So thank you to everyone who tuned in and watched and left comments down below, as well as sharing our video. I noticed a few people doing that throughout as well. It's very appreciated. We will be back again next week at 3 p.m. as always, where Angela will possibly be here and another guest as well. And thank you as well to obviously yourself, Ewan, for coming in and having a chat with me today. And
thank you very much to the viewers as well for your feedback.
For questions and taking part. I mean, usually we do kind of do a bit more of a chat about the news of the week, but I feel this is a pretty good conversation, just kind of about where Scotland's at and a lot of like difficult challenges it's currently facing. So
absolutely.
That's excellent. Well, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for tuning in. We will be back again next week at 3 p.m. And if you want to have a listen to this again, it will be available on iTunes very shortly, as it does come out as a podcast as well. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you all again next week.